Hello, great children of God. I thought I would make my own mind map for you, and trying to summarize as best I can some of the main points of Chapter 1. Now, Chapter 1 is so amazing. It's so beautiful because there's such a lot in it. But I'm hoping that this general outline, using this idea of the mind map, will help you to understand how things fit in a little bit better. So we're going to start off here with the main idea, and the way I put it on the mind map last week was to say that God is calling us to know Him. God wants to give us a hunger. He's given every single person who exists in the whole world a hunger to know Him. And I decided, for the purposes of this mind map, that I would say that everybody's looking for truth. Of course, truth is a capital T, and truth is God. So how do we come to know God? Since He created a desire in us to know Him, it stands to reason that He has to give us ways. If He's going to be fair, He has to give us ways to know Him. So we have two different ways of knowing God. One way is with God's help. And of course you know what that is. We're going to be talking about it later. It's called revelation. But we also have ways of knowing God without His help. By that I mean without any supernatural help, just with the aid of reason. Now, this area up here we're going to talk about for a couple of minutes, even though that comes later on in the chapter. And that, of course, is the wonderful gift that God gave us to know Him. And He gave us this wonderful gift which we call revelation. And revelation is unveiling. It's God unveiling His truths for us so that we can understand something about who He is in a deeper way. But even more, that we can come into a relationship with Him, because the revelation is not just telling us about Him, but it's enabling us to form a relationship with Him. And this occurs, of course, through faith. That's why I put faith kind of as the bridge that connects our hunger or our desire to know God and this way that God shows Himself to us. Now, what does revelation do? Well, it enables us to know God. It enables us to reach Him and have a relationship with Him. So this is a sure path right here, a sure path to the knowledge of God through faith and revelation. But remember that it's with the help of God. Now, is there anything in our nature that can help us to know God? What about people who never read the Bible, people who never come to know Jesus Christ, people who never have any supernatural help in their lives? Can they also know God? Well, the First Vatican Council taught us that yes, we can come to know God, that God exists, and some things about Him with certitude. That means we can be sure of it through the gift of human reason. And we'll talk about that right now. One of the things we can know through human reason is we can know about the material world. What is the material world? It's what we can know through our five senses. The sense of taste, the sense of smell, the sense of hearing. All the five senses tell us about the material world. And if we apply our mind to the material world, what happens? Well, we come to develop something called science. Science is a reflection on the material world with the gift of reason. And there are a lot of things that we know from science, right? We know about biology. We know about medicine. We know about the weather. We know about curing diseases. So there's a lot that we can know here from science. And it is the application of our reason, our thinking process, to the material world so that we can come to a better understanding. We can also reflect on the non-material world. One of the things we talked about in class was that we can come to a knowledge of the existence of the soul or the spiritual life. We think about the fact that we have a conscience, we have the ability to know right and wrong, We have a hope for happiness that's beyond our natural abilities. And all of these indicate that man has a spiritual nature called the soul. This area of reflection on the non-material world is sometimes called metaphysics. It's things that are beyond the physical world. Remember, the physical world is over here. This is the non-physical world. And somewhere kind of in between, we have a branch of knowledge called philosophy, where we try to find truth in a variety of ways. Some of it's about the non-material world, some of it has to do with using the material world, but that branch is called philosophy. Now, neither of these two things are in your book in this chapter, so we're going to forget about those for now. And what we want to think about is this area over here. We want to look at what can reason know about the material world, and can it in some way help us to know God? And, of course, we reflect on the natural world. And remember, there were some things that we talked about that helped us to know about the natural world. Remember, we talked about order, beauty, and the amazing things about nature. Well, the nice thing about this is both science and the natural world can lead us to a reflection that St. Thomas Aquinas developed so beautifully in the 5 ways. And you remember that when he looked at the natural world, he said, well, things are moving. There must have been a first mover. He said, well, there must be a first cause. He said, well, look at the beautiful order of things in the world. There must be someone that designed that order. He looked at the degrees of perfection, and he said, well, there must be some supreme standard. And then finally he looked at the fact that there must be some necessary being. All beings can't be, as he said, contingent or dependent, but there must be a necessary being. Okay? So where do these 5 ways lead us? Well, they lead us to, you could say, a proof or a demonstration that God exists. What can we know here by reflecting on nature? What can we know about God? Well, we can know that he exists. That would be one thing. We also can come to know that he is powerful. And we can also come to know that he is beautiful. And we can come to know that he's eternal, that he's before time. So we can learn a lot about God, but we can't learn everything about him. And that's why, as we'll talk about later, that's why we have to have this area up here called Revelation, and we have to have God's help to know him better. Okay, now as we studied in class, we saw that in the natural world there's this wonderful beauty. When we look at Niagara Falls, or we look at a beautiful sunset, it makes us realize that there must be some source of that beauty in God, and that God himself is beautiful. And as I said a couple of minutes ago, we see the power in nature, even nuclear power and the power of water, and in floods and in the ocean when the ocean really roars, and that gives us some kind of an idea of God. And then, of course, we see the beautiful order in the universe, and you can give a lot of examples of that. How the planets, are in a perfect ellipse, and how the sun comes up, and how the crops have their seasons, and everything seems to be so beautifully ordered. And what do these 3 things do? This order and this beauty and this power, it also points to God. So I have all these arrows showing us that when we look at these things, namely the beauty of the natural world in all of its power, its beauty, and its order, it points us to God. So those are some things we can know through reason, right? That's where it all comes from. We think about the natural world, and it helps us, it leads us, really. It leads us, where does it lead us? It leads us to God if we're thinking properly. Okay, now, what is the difference between the knowledge that we have of God in this area and the knowledge that we have of God in this area? And that's one of the questions that this chapter raises, because our knowledge here through nature is different from our knowledge up here with supernatural help. What can we know about God up here that we really can't figure out down here? Because this doesn't lead us, this area doesn't lead us to a full understanding of God. So let's talk about that for a couple of minutes. And the first thing that I'd like to say is that, Revelation tells us God's secrets. It tells us about His nature, for example, the Trinity. It tells us about, His hopes for mankind, for the universe. A lot of the things that are in the Bible that we just couldn't know without the help of God. But God also, Revelation also allows us to have a relationship of intimacy with God. We're called into a relationship with friendship with Him, and this friendship enables us to have a relationship with Him and be very close to Him. That's something that nature, there's always this distance between nature, and God. It's almost like there's a barrier. We look at nature and it doesn't bring us into this intimate friendship with God. But faith and revelation do bring us into an intimate relationship with God. And then revelation also helps our reason, because reason can make mistakes. Reason is, in fact, it's prone to make mistakes. I mean, one example that I can think of right now is, there are some people that have reasoned that abortion should be made legal. And, well, that's based on a false reasoning, isn't it? Somehow it's thinking that a woman's so-called right to choose is more important than the right to life of the unborn child. So we really need revelation in order to help our reason. And so we need revelation to help us in all three areas, to help us to know things we couldn't know about God, to bring us into intimacy with Him, and to help our reason, which is damaged. Now, let's think about reason for a minute here, because there's some more that we could do down here in reflecting on it, and some of these things are brought out in the chapter, and I'd like to explain them a little bit better. One of the things we see in our book is that reason does have its errors. Remember, I said that up here, that reason needs help. Well, unfortunately, reason does make mistakes, and the book lists a few of those mistakes. So let's look at a couple of them just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. The first error is scientism, and that is a type of reasoning where people say the only thing that exists is material things that science can experiment with. If it's not something science can experiment with, then it does not exist. Well, how could you ever experiment on the human soul? How could you ever perform an experiment on God or the angels or anything that's spiritual? Obviously you can't. So the idea of scientism is an error. It's an error of reasoning. Another example of an error of reasoning that you saw in your book was atheistic humanism. Remember that humanism is making a God out of human beings. If you deny that there's a spiritual God, like we do, we believe that God exists. If you deny that, then what happens? Well, sometimes people make human beings into God. They make human nature into a God. And atheism means there's no God in heaven, but instead we've replaced human beings with the real God. So that's another error that people sometimes come up with. Another error which we've, I think, talked about already is materialism. And that's very much related to this one on science. And it's just that, as I said in class, I am a material girl, as Madonna said. Materialism means that only matter exists and nothing spiritual exists. So that gives you a little summary. I hope that's been helpful. There's a lot more that we could say about the chapter, because it has very, very many beautiful things, but I thought that mind map, at least, would give you some kind of a picture and some kind of a sense of how the chapter is ordered. May the Lord bless you.